Thank you very much to everybody for coming. My name is Rebecca Dewey, and I'm the chair of the East Midlands branch of the Institute of Physics. I'd like to introduce Jill Henshaw here. Jill is a British Sign Language interpreter, so if anybody would like to see more clearly, please do move down to the front. So I'll do the usual stuff about fire safety. There's no planned fire drill this evening, so if there's flashing lights and alarms and the usual stuff, please head calmly towards one of the exits. There's one at the top and two at the bottom. The Institute of Physics is a professional body for physics. That means that it promotes physics, not only for physicists, but for everybody. We want everyone to realise why we've devoted a large portion of our lives to physics. And one of the ways that we do this is putting on a prestige lecture such as this. We've also had to think very carefully about how we include all the people who wouldn't naturally engage with physics because we're so enthusiastic about it. And through part of this, we've got a British Sign Language interpreter tonight. And one of the other endeavours that we've been working at is the Girl Guided badge. So through this, Girl Guides throughout the East Midlands, as part of the pilot phase, but we're rolling it out gradually, have been doing, on average, about 5 hours of physics per girl. And we've now got through 9,000 badges, which means over 45,000 hours of physics has been done to achieve these wonderful badges. So if you can think of any other ways of making physics accessible to people who don't think they like physics, please do come and talk to us in the committee, because that's really what we're passionate about doing. I'd like to now introduce Timandra. Timandra Harkness is a presenter, writer and comedian. She presents regularly on Radio 4, so you'll have probably heard her voice. She writes for many print and online publications, as well as publishing her recent book, Big Data, which you can see at the bottom. I'm afraid we're only taking cash this evening. They are £10 if you would like one signed. Timandra also tours as a solo comedian, making topics such as statistics and neuroscience entertaining and accessible. She's also a fellow and active member of the Royal Statistical Society. So I'm totally honoured to be able to introduce you to Timandra tonight to talk about big data and democracy.
Welcome, just in time. Excellent hat. I finally discovered the solution to never having pockets, by the way, is to wear boots and put your fashion pack into the boot. Of course, that doesn't legislate against forgetting to unmute it when you speak to the audience. Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people here. How many of you didn't think you were interested in physics? Okay, well, I hope there's going to be enough physics here to feel that you have changed your minds. I loved physics, although I didn't pursue it any further than 15. Oh!
Is that okay for you?
Yes.
Can you still see the sign?
Would you want it up?
No, let me have it. I don't mind if the lights are on.
That's better.
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah.
The sign. Yes, where were we? How many people are here because you're interested in big data? Ooh, good. How many people are here because you're interested in democracy? How many people is both? How many people is neither? Yes. Well, hopefully there's something in it to make it working well. So yeah, I read the book, Big Data, Does Size Matter? And the title should tell you two things. One is that it doesn't take itself too seriously, and the other one is that it's what you do with it that counts. You're allowed to snigger. There will be terrible puns in my talk, and it's best that you just relax and go with them for now. And I raised it for two reasons. One is that the mathematical side of me, because I am somebody who likes math so much that even after I didn't have to study it anymore, I started studying it again just for fun. I did an Open University degree in maths and statistics in my spare time. So part of me was just very interested in the mathematics of big data and how you can use quite clever mathematical tools to learn things from lots of data. And the other side of me was very interested in the way it's becoming a bit of a social phenomenon. People were talking about big data as a thing, quite often saying big data was going to solve this problem and that problem, and the whole of society would be resolved if we had enough data. And I felt a bit sceptical about that. So part of me thought this is amazingly clever, the other part of me thought this is hype, and I thought I would look into it and find out which it was. Spoiler, I think it's a bit of both. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm first of all going to talk about big data, and I'm going to take you really, really right back to basics. Because one thing I learned was that when I told people I was making a radio program about big data, some of my friends took the opportunity to sidle up to me and say, what is data? Not even what is big data, but what is data? Because it was a word they'd heard a lot and felt embarrassed to ask. It's like when you meet somebody and you don't get their name, and after a few times it just becomes embarrassing to ask. So I'm going to go right back to basics. But then I'm going to talk in much more detail about the relationship between big data and democracy, which is much more topical than when we planned this event. We planned this event before they called the general election. So yeah, we were here first. And then there will be time for questions, but also I'm really interested to hear your opinions afterwards. So, this is, I don't normally put loads of words on slides because you're all now reading the words instead of listening to me, which is fine, but I wanted to really quote from the horse's mouth people who have been using this stuff. And this is the Democratic National Committee's Director of Data Science, 2014 to 2016. So in America, this is one of the people who've absolutely been using data to do politics. And saying, oh well, 2016, you think this is new, but no, actually, every election has become more and more reliant on data. Using analytics to drive everything from overall strategy and messaging to individual voter contacts and advertising. So bear that in mind as we go right back to the beginning. Yes, the reason I say this is, okay, this is my first sighting of my book in the wild, and I don't know how many of you have written a book, but when you look through the door of a bookshop and you see that your book is on a shelf because somebody thinks somebody might buy one, it's the most amazing thrill. And then I find I'm sandwiched between Paul Hollywood and Marcus de Soto. Surely every author's dream. If that's not suitable for a family audience, you can think I'm there between motorcycling television presenters and a professor of mathematics, which is pretty much my career goal. Right down the middle there. So, can anybody tell me what this is? Any ideas? If you've seen me do this talk before, it's not mine. What is it?
It's something to count goods from the Middle East.
Very good guess. It is a tally stick of sorts. Any paleontologists in tonight?
A bone?
No, a bone. It is a bone. So it's both things. It's a tally stick and it's a bone. It's the shin bone of a young wolf. About 30,000 years ago, in a cave in Ice Age Europe, what's now the Czech Republic, somebody, who or maybe several people, carved 57 notches into this bone in groups of 5, the way that we would tally something today. And so that makes it, for me, the oldest existing example of digital data, because it was 5 because you have 5 fingers, 5 digits. And digital data is just data that you could count on your fingers if you had enough fingers. In those days, only 57, not too many. Now, we don't know anything about who carved it or what they were counting, but we do know it was a revolution in how they stored information. In my mind, it's important that it's a wolf bone, because maybe they were counting how many wolves they had killed in that winter. And maybe it was a competition between 2 hunters to see who was the best hunter. Maybe they were A/B testing the old wooden arrows and the new stone-tipped arrows, and they wanted to see which was more efficient. And every time they killed a wolf, they would save the skull and put it in a pile on one side or other of the cave. And as winter went on, the piles got higher and higher until somebody had to sleep in the middle of the piles went, well, perhaps if you hunters are so brilliant at killing wolves, one of you could come up with a better way of counting how many you've killed. And one of them picked up a spare shin bone lying around and went, I just put one scratch every time I killed a wolf, we could get the wolf skulls and just have one shin bone. And we wouldn't even need to be able to count, because you could just count off notches until one bone ran out of notches and the other bone didn't. Obviously, we don't know how much of that is true, but it seems likely that none of it is. But nonetheless, somebody revolutionised the way they stored information. Now, there's a few things I like about it, apart from it being the oldest example of digital data. It's the fact that 57 in binary code is 111001, 6 bits, 6 binary digits, which makes it, if you put in a reference bit at either end, that would be 8 bits. So one wolf bone is equal to 1 byte. I did warn you that puns would get worse, and they will get worse. And the other thing I like is that, of course, you can, because you can spell out, but who here is fluent in ASCII code? I bet somebody is. Yeah, okay. So you can spell out, so with one shin bone, you can spell one letter in ASCII. So with a wolf's worth of shin bones, you can spell out a 4-letter word, which would be, you said you were fluent. Wolf. Wolf, yes, exactly, wolf. So one wolf would spell out a 4-letter word. 250 wolves would be a kilobyte. And to store a megabyte of data, you would need 250,000 wolves, which is coincidentally the entire world's population of wolves today. Which is why we don't use wolves. We use computers. So, fast forward to today. How big is this big data we hear about? This is me, underground at CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider. I really am that happy. They're very hospitable. If you want to go there, they do underground tours. So if you can get yourself to Switzerland, the Swiss-French borders, it's very easy to go look underground. I was very lucky because they were upgrading, so they kind of opened up this is one of the detectors, the CMS, the compact muon solenoid. No idea what a big muon solenoid would look like. And they've opened up the layers of the detectors like a bagel cut in half. And the bit in the middle that's yellow, that's where the beamline would go through, firing subatomic particles at ridiculous speeds. While that was running, before the upgrade, they were generating 40 million megabytes per second of data. And they had a whole system designed to throw away most of the data so they could just keep the bit that was useful. They had way too much. Since the upgrade, I think they have more. I've given up trying to say how much data there is because it's expanding so fast, it just goes out of date before I finish. For example, while I was writing the book, I interviewed a brain scientist in California called Professor John D. Van Horn. And he was saying, because he uses brain scans, they generate enormous amounts of data, and in his first job after getting his PhD, they sent him out of the lab to buy the biggest hard drive they could afford to store all the data from the brain scans. And when they brought the hard drive back into the lab, people came from the labs all around to look at it, because they'd never seen anything so big. It was 4 gigabytes. And I'm talking to him on the phone, I'm looking at his picture on the internet, going, how long ago was this? Because you still look quite young, but I mean, at that point, my phone was 8 gigabytes, and now it's probably 128 gigabytes. And just, this is an idea of how rapidly it's all expanding. So I no longer try to say, this is how much, because the numbers just become meaningless. But the other thing I asked myself was, is it just that we have a lot of data? Is that all that big data is? Or is there something else that's new and interesting about it? And I decided there were other things about it that make it new and interesting. And like all self-respecting authors, I made a backronym. Now, do you all know what a backronym is? No, okay. This is the only thing any of you are going to remember about this talk. Guaranteed, always happens. A backronym is where you want an acronym, but you want it to make up a particular word, so you reverse engineer it to get the word you wanted. In this case, data. So, what's special about big data, apart from being big? Dimensions, first one. And this actually, the best definition of this, I got from another brain scientist called Professor Paul Matthews, who I spoke to in London at Imperial College. By the way, this, some of you may have spotted this already, because I know some of you work in brain scanning. This is actually my brain. Not actual science. Sadly. So I spoke to Professor Paul Matthews, and I'd already spoken to the other brain scientist, who was very excited about brain scans, all this data. So I said to Professor Matthews, you must be really excited, all this data, all these brain scans. And he was much more like, well, it's good. I'd rather have 100 high-quality brain scans than 12 low-quality brain scans. But that's not big data. That's just large data. Is that basically the same sign, big and large? Yeah.
Large.
Large. And big is, oh, there you go. Excellent. That's that cleared up. So he said, so just lots of brain scans, that's just large data. Big data is when I get the brain scans and I put them together with other things to get a multi-dimensional picture of the patient. So in this case, it was the brain scans, the patient's medical records, the postcodes where the patients had lived, and the weather reports of those postcodes, and he put them all together and asked them a new question. That was not the question for which they collected the data originally. And his question was, is there a relationship between how many hours of sunshine the patients received and the progression of their multiple sclerosis? Because that was the research question he was interested in. And it seems from research published since that there is a relationship. So that was useful. And for him, he said, that's the definition for me of big data, is when you get different dimensions by putting together different data sets and asking a new question that was not thought of before. And that's so useful that I stole this definition and have used it ever since, including at one event where he was sitting in the front row. So it's lucky that I was quoting. Now, obviously, it's not just medical, all sorts of data you can put together different dimensions. There's a public data set called the New York City taxi data set, which anybody can download and use, and it's literally the records of all the New York City taxi meters. And somebody has got this record and put it together with the geographical dimension of New York. So you can see this lovely virtual skyscrapers in Manhattan and the two airports where you get these peaks of demand. The person that did that is Andrew James Swoboda. I was trying to give people credit for their work. So putting together different dimensions is the first D. A is for automatic, because so much of what we do now just automatically generates data. Anytime you use a smartphone, or a computer, or a credit card, or walk around anywhere with cameras, or get in a New York City taxi, data is automatically being collected. It's the default now, really, to collect data. And this has all sorts of uses. Machines that automatically collect data and automatically process it into forms that we can use. For example, who uses an app called Strava? Anybody? Yeah, these are the fit sporty people. Is it cycling or running? Cycling. Yeah, so you probably recognise this kind of thing. For the rest of us, slobs, you say it's an app you can put on your phone or any other GPS device, and it will track where you go, put that information together with other information to give you things like how many calories did you burn. This is a particularly terrifying charity cycle ride. You can see along the bottom, it shows you elevation, it shows you how up and down hill you are. So you can see it's flat, and then mountains, and then flat again, and more mountains and downhill at the end, back end. But once you know this, that the app can do this, you can use it for your own purposes, like Murphy Map of San Francisco who went out for a ride around San Francisco, which is very hilly, as we know. And when he came back, he uploaded his route, and it looked like this. Marry me, Emily. And what's really sweet is, if you look at his Strava page, the first comment is from Emily, saying, "Yes, I love you." And his reply is, "Yeah, XOXO." Which the young people tell me means hugs and kisses. Afterwards, after I found this and thought, what a lovely story, I thought, I hope that's the same Emily. Otherwise, things could be really awful. But it's not just, well, if anyone here is thinking about proposing and thinking, how much effort should I go to? I think Murphy has set a very specific bar here. It's 749 calories or more. Anything less, you don't really love them. But you can use it for sensible things, of course. Well, fairly sensible things. You might want to test a new aeroplane by flying on a route that looks like the aeroplane that you're testing. You can test it somehow, right? Or, if you fly in an aeroplane with a Rolls-Royce engine, it's full of little sensors that not only feed into the cockpit to the pilot, like airspeed and temperature, but also sends data back to Rolls-Royce's own engineering headquarters. And really subtle things like vibration detectors to see the pattern of vibration and compare it with previous engines, or magnetic detectors that pick up small metallic fragments in the lubricant, so you can see if it's wearing faster than you would expect. And then, if these patterns are unusual, but look a bit like the previous aircraft engine, I think a bit like Amazon for aircraft engines. Engines that previously showed this vibration pattern went on to fail 10,000 air hours later. But of course, if you see that pattern coming, then you can get an engineer out to meet the aeroplane when it's got a few hours on the ground, you can send the parts, so you can avoid these problems by predicting them. And this brings us on to T, which is for time, because you're collecting data, often almost in real time. So that means that you can make a time series and show the regularity or irregularity and project it into the future and use it to make predictions. This is another New York City taxi data graph showing incredibly regular patterns, the days of the week of supply and demand. This tweet, in fact, is the reason why the data set is publicly available, because a researcher called Chris Kwon saw this as a tweet. He was in New York and said, oh, well, this is a public office, so I should be able to put in a Freedom of Information request and get access to the whole data set. So he did this, and they said, but it's a huge, huge data set. It's all the meters of all the taxis in New York. You'd have to come into the office with a huge hard drive. And he said, right, yes, I'm on my way. So he said he did that, and they put all the data on, and he anonymized it and cleaned it up and made it available. And again, you can put together the dimension of time with other physical dimensions. So, for example, you get this map of New York, again, that changes through time as the pattern of taxi pickups for long and short journeys changes through 24 hours, like a heart beating. So that's time, and the second day is for hour. Alan Turing. I told you nobody ever laughed at that. It's okay, it's AI. It is AI. Right. But Alan Turing is the grandfather of AI, I think, in many ways. So that's why I like to use him to start us off. Because in 1950, he wrote this incredibly prescient essay about machines that think. Could a machine think? Bear in mind, 1950, so it's just after the war, when a computer was like the size of this wall and made of physical knobs that you had to turn and cogs going around. And he's working with that, an imagining machine that could think like a human being, that could learn like a child. Not only that, he's thinking about it in incredible detail. So he thinks, well, it won't be possible to apply exactly the same teaching process, the machine, as to a normal child. it will not, for example, be provided legs, so it could not be asked to go and fill the coal scuttle. Anyone under 30 in the room? Coal scuttle is basically a metal bucket that you go out and fill with coal, because everything in Alan Turing's house would have run on coal, not just the heating, the hot water, the cooking, water for bathing, water for washing, water for washing up. Absolutely everything, you had to burn coal to do it. That's why all the buildings were built. But Alan Turing, who can imagine a machine that learns like a child, cannot imagine a world with central heating. But he goes on in even more adorable detail. Well, you know, you might not have eyes, but however well these deficiencies might be overcome by clever engineering, one could not send a creature to school without the other children making excessive fun of it. So he's already worrying about his little robot child being bullied for being different. It's really sweet. So I'm on a one-person mission to, you know, when you see pictures of AI in newspapers, it's always one of two things, right? It's always either Terminator with the red eyes, or it's the really annoying white plastic robot that's usually leaning over you and pointing at your computer screen, robo-screening something that you're doing. I want to get rid of those. When you think of AI, I want you to think of Alan Turing and his little robot child, little Al. Half human, half robot. Obviously, we know Alan Turing had a very tragic personal life and never had any children. This is really obvious when he goes on in the same essay to use a child as an analogy to explain how a computer program works. He uses the idea of a mother with a child called Tommy. Suppose mother wants Tommy to call up the cobbler's every morning on his way to school to see if her shoes are done. For anyone under 30, again, a cobbler is somebody in their shoes. So she can ask him afresh every morning. Now, I'm too lazy to have children, but I understand this is a very plausible scenario. However, Alan Turing goes on, alternatively, she can stick up a notice once and for all in the hall, which he will see when he leaves for school, and which tells him to call for shoes, and also to destroy the notice when he comes back, if he has the shoes with him. Now, I don't know if anybody in this room has ever met a child. That's not going to happen, is it? It's absolutely not going to happen. But, as an analogy, for a basic computer algorithm, it's brilliant. Right? And because a computer algorithm in its basic form is really just like a flowchart for a computer. And I assume you've seen a flowchart before? Yes? Then you know what I mean. If no, you have now. So if we put mother and little Tommy into a flowchart, the way a computer algorithm would work, it's perfect. It's absolutely spot on. Number one, go to the cobblers. Number two, ask if mother's shoes are ready. If the answer is no, go back to one. Probably not immediately. Should probably put in wait a day and then go back to one. Otherwise, the cobbler's just going to get really annoyed. So after a day, go back to the cobblers and keep asking, are mother's shoes ready? Until the answer is yes, at which point, take this notice down when you come home. See, now for a computer, this is really straightforward. You've given it all the steps, it'll just keep doing that until it reaches the end. Technically, I think you have to put stop, but yeah, I think that's implicit. But when Alan Turing was imagining a computer that learns like a child, he was thinking much more advanced than this. This is simple instructions, rule-based algorithm. He was thinking of something much more like the way that we learn things. In fact, he had an analogy. He said, well, you know, you could give somebody a rule that tells them how to behave every time, or you could give them a general law of behaviour, which, for example, if you pinch a man, he will squeak. So let's just do a little Turing test. Anybody sitting next to a man? Just like to pinch him now. Okay, good. I don't prove that he's correct. But the alternative to this, he said, was instead of rules, you have laws of behaviour. So like a general thing like that, but you don't tell somebody what to do, you don't tell a machine what to do in every circumstance. To demonstrate this, we're now going to play a game, which is so demeaningly easy that even now I've told you it's demeaningly easy, you're still going to feel insulted. Get this out of the way, okay? So this is how he imagines little owl learning. In fact, sorry, I've forgotten I put in this. This is actually very close to a machine that learns the way a child learns. This is the iCub robot, built in Italy, and it's designed to learn the way that children learn. In fact, there are scientists in Cornwall using it to research language learning, working with other scientists in America who will then try the same experiments on real children. None of them are painful at all. But the iCub, so for example, if you wanted to learn the word ball, you give it a ball and you say ball, and it will take it in its little hand until it learns to say ball. So you just keep giving it the ball, red ball, give it a ball, until it's really sick of getting given a ball. But it does learn language much more similar to the way that we learn language. So, back to the game. Now the game is called Cat or Not. You can already guess the rules. I'm going to show you a series of pictures. When the pictures of a cat, I want you to shout cat, or do the sign for cat, which is, okay, you do both. Shout and do the sign for cat. If it's not a cat, you say not, and you do the sign not. Do you all practice the signs? So you're going to shout cat, or
Not.
This is pretty good. This is like, wow, it's good. Okay, ready?
Cat.
Yeah, even though you can't see the rest of it.
Cat.
Even though it's camouflaged. Oh, this is what I was.
Cat.
I just want to make one thing clear, okay? I did not remove this cat's ears in order to make a point that you can still recognise a cat without pointy ears, okay? This Charlie had his ears removed for medical reasons and continued to live a happy cat life for several years afterwards, okay? No cats were harmed in the making of this crude demonstration of machine learning.
Not.
That's right, this is my sadly deceased co-star, Socrates. Thanks for your sympathy.
Not. Cat.
What's that hesitation? I mean, admittedly, they're wearing the same shirt. But still, if you think that cat looks like him. Yeah, that's Adrian's own Instagram. Okay, so you get the idea. And even though I told you it'd be easy, you're still a bit insulted that I even made you do it. But if I asked you to make an algorithm, a flowchart, a list of rules that could enable a computer to tell a cat from another cat every time reliably, that would be quite hard, wouldn't it? Because you might say, oh, it's got pointy ears. Or unless it's Charlie. It's got 4 legs. Unless it's in a bag. Well, it is, again, that cat still did have them. You couldn't see them. There's no cats as a But you had no trouble at all in telling the cat from another cat. Because when you were little, you spent a lot of time pointing at anything furry and saying, cat! And your parents would either go, yes, very clever! Or no, that's a dog, or no, probably not Ed Sheeran when you were little. Oh, I don't know, some of you are quite young. But anyway, you learn by trial and error and by humans correcting you when you got it wrong. Now that is how, very broadly, how machine learning works. And you know on the internet, when you're trying to prove you're not a robot, by picking the pictures that have street traffic lights or buses or cars or whatever, what you're basically doing is marking a computer's homework. Because a machine learning algorithm is learning to distinguish traffic lights from not traffic lights, buses from not buses, You're probably saving the life of some future person with a self-driving car hurtling towards them, in fact. And that's exactly what's going on. They will have given the algorithm a million pictures of traffic lights and a million pictures of not traffic lights and said, these are the traffic lights, these are not traffic lights. And then the next time it gets 2 million mixed up pictures of traffic lights and not traffic lights, and the algorithm has to sort them out and make up its own rules for how to distinguish between the two. And then we go in as unpaid helpers and correct its own work. We're basically all the equivalent of the people in Tesco's who train you to use the self-checkouts so that they can be sacked. It's like we're all doing that on the internet for algorithms. So that's very broadly how machine learning works, how the kind, when people talk about AI and big data, that's the kind of thing they're looking at. Algorithms that find patterns in things and sort things. So that's big data, dimensions, automatic, time, and AI. What does it do in practice in the real world? Well, this is one of the interesting examples of what you can do with the New York City taxi database. You can compare it to newspaper reports with photos of celebrities getting into taxis in particular places at particular times. And you can work out that if somebody got into a taxi at this place and this time, this was the journey they took, this was what they paid, and this was how much they tipped. So there's two problems with this. One is simply the privacy problem, that if you're a celebrity, you might not want people knowing where you got out. Never mind what you tipped, you might not want people knowing where you were going to. And the other problem is, it has the illusion that you now know this extra thing about people. But in fact, if you look really closely, it says the tip is unknown because they paid in cash. That's not why I'm only taking cash for the books, by the way, that's just lack of technology. So big data has this illusion that it gives you all the information, that all the data that you could possibly have on that question is in there and you just need to go and look for it. Whereas in reality, there are always things that are missing. There are always things that weren't collected. And it's easy to forget that, but it's important to always say to yourself, what questions did they not ask? What data is not there? In this case, if it's cash, you don't know where it is, in fact. So on to the difficult questions of how big data is used in the real world. And particularly this evening, democracy. Because there is a lot of talk at the moment about how big data is used in political campaigning elections. I'm a bit torn about this. I was writing about this in 2015 when I wrote the first edition of the book. In 2016, the second edition, I added a lot more. So I'm quite pleased that people are now starting to go, oh, oh, hang on, you collect all my data and you use it to target me with adverts, and in particular, political adverts. I think it's good, so we're all aware of that. But I also think that some of the concerns about it are misplaced or even perhaps overdone, but we'll get on to that. So, this is quite a recent, it's not that recent, it's a couple of years old, from The Guardian, The Dangerous Less Democracy. And this is when The Guardian first started to get excited about all this and do some research following the Brexit referendum vote, and then later on following the election of Donald Trump. But this is one part of The Guardian discovering something that other parts of The Guardian have known about for some time, because back in 2012, The Guardian ran a series of articles about how marvellous it was that Obama was using big data to get elected. And in fact, the techniques that people are worried about now are almost entirely the same as the ones that the Obama campaigns used to get Obama elected. This is they ran a whole series of articles basically, but the unified computer database that gathers and refines information on millions of potential voters is at the forefront of campaign technology and could be the key to an Obama win. And arguably it was, although I always tend to think he got elected because he had something that a lot of people wanted. How do we know what they were doing? Well, conveniently, this publication, which is free, by the way, you can search it on the internet and download the whole thing, goes into a lot of detail written by the people that were involved in the Obama campaign, amongst other campaigns, and they spell out in glorious detail exactly how they did what they did. So this guy is founder and director of analytics at Clarity Campaign Labs, one of the leading modelers for democratic campaigns. The key things here are modelling and micro-targeting have become ubiquitous. Remember, this is 2016, so this is a few years ago. Individual level models have been used by democratic campaigns since as early as 2004. Indeed, in many ways, they're simply an extension of tactics employed to target voters at the aggregate level for decades. So there's nothing spectacularly new about this in 2016. And there's three main points to how this works. Daniel Scarboloni, who is the Associate Director of Research and Data at Gdpr Interactive, actually spells out in his article in his book, again, in great detail how it works. Let the audience be your guide. Tailor the creative. Don't just measure how much, measure how well. And I'll go through these in a bit more detail. Leverage the sophistication of political analytics programs to define the precise audience you want to reach, and then build strategies matching the consumption and behavioural patterns of that audience. So you're not just saying, these people voted Democrat before, I'm going to address them as Democrat voters, or these people didn't vote Democrat before, I'm going to try and win them over. It's much more detailed knowledge than that. And it's knowledge by gathering together other databases that people will have allowed their data to be collected for completely different reasons. And they're completely unembarrassed about using existing platforms. So nobody has built a person-based advertising platform that rivals Facebook's, a buying platform that rivals Google's DoubleClick. An overwhelming majority of democratic campaigns use Axiom, Experian, or Infogroup to supplement their voter files with consumer records. So in America, they have more detailed knowledge of voters because they can record whether people have expressed a loyalty to a Democrat or Democrat. But even here, you can get the electoral roll, and then you can get hold of consumer databases and match up the same person. So, for example, this is very timely. Recently, I was walking to a station and saw this poster. This is Experian. Experian and Axiom both also working here. We know what makes you one of a kind. Now, they're saying this. They are trying to make us comfortable with the idea that they have data that tells them a lot about us from all sorts of different sources. Remember, they're putting together data from different databases. So they have things that maybe stuff that we've bought before, maybe things that we've inquired about, if we've filled in forms about our preferences with surveys, all sorts of information that they can gather from different sources about who we are and what we do. And they're saying, no, this is great, because we can give you a more personal service. So it's for your benefit. Then there's this software called Nation Builder, which the Obama campaign used, which all of the major political parties here use, certainly in the 2015 election, so I'd be very surprised if they're not using it now. And what it does is it matches different databases together. So as you see, matches your email list to social media. So if you give your email address to a political party, then they can go out and use this software to find any of your social media accounts, and then they know what you're concerned about, what you're interested in, what you've been tweeting or Facebooking about, and they know what's going to make you tick. This is how they sell themselves. Put people at the centre. Starting with your email list, we'll match it to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Cloud, so you can see faces and bios of everyone in the community right away. So if you've given your email address to any political party, they have a picture of you, literally, they have a photo of you, and a biography of you, and a record of what you do online. When they talk about voter targeting and deciding what your priority audience is, this is basically what Daniel Scarlett is talking about. There's no point in targeting people who are definitely going to vote for your opponent. And there's no point in targeting people who are definitely going to vote for you. Sounds cynical, but if they're definitely going to vote for you, why spend your campaign money? You want to look at the undecided voters that you might be able to win over, and the people that would vote for you, but they're not sure they can be bothered to get out and actually do it. So you need to give them a little boost. Bring this back to today and this election, and luckily, because everybody's got interest in this, there's now a lot of information out there. So, for example, the Sky technology correspondent discovered this, that the Lib Dems are using data to profile every voter in the UK, not just people who give their email address, and giving numerical scores. So this fellow, who is director of a digital campaigning organisation, the Open Rights Group, has these scores amongst 42 others. So they decided to use 22% Brexit Party, 77% Remain, and a whole bunch of other things. So anyone who's on the electoral roll in Britain will have these numerical scores in some Lib Dem database. On to number 2, tailor the creative. What does he mean by that? He means that you can show people only the message that you think will have the impact on them, instead of speaking to everyone with one megaphone, which I think is an interesting analogy from the old days of politics, when it was all about getting out there with one message and perhaps literally the megaphone and saying, keep the coal mines open, or stop the Iraq war, or whatever it is. No, now it's all about an individual message tailored to that person. Okay, what does this mean in the context of this current election? Well, conveniently, Facebook have now decided, no, we are going to be more transparent. We have an ads directory, so you can go and look at Facebook's ad directory and it'll show you all political ads and some information about who has seen it, how many people have seen it, how much they spent on it. You can search by political party or by campaign. So, for example, the Labour Party are specifically targeting women aged between, over 55, basically. Women of the age whose pensions have been postponed. And women born in the 1950s. So there's an ad particularly targeting those women and saying, Tories and Lib Dems have betrayed you, come and vote for us. Why bother to show that to anybody else? They can show it only to those people on Facebook and possibly on Instagram, although I don't think they follow this. They probably assume women in that age group aren't very much on Instagram. They're already in WhatsApp group for their families, as far as I can see. So that's specifically content, specifically targeted to those people. But there's more than that, because you can actually show different versions of the same thing to different audiences. So the Conservatives, for example, have got this one. Parliament is in gridlock. We need a Conservative majority to get Brexit done, only shown to men. And younger men at that, in fact. Spot the difference. This one only shown to women. Parliament is in gridlock. A Conservative majority will get Brexit done so that we can invest in our NHS, schools and police. So presumably they've decided that women are going to be much more susceptible if you say, we'll get this done and we'll spend money on these other things. Whereas younger men, I don't know, maybe they're more impulsive. They're just like, they can only take in one thing at a time. I don't know what the psychology here is, but they will have tested them. So there will be a reasoning behind it. So this one, even goes to stage 4, it's actually a video. I'm going to play the video. And the interesting thing here is this ad uses dynamic creative, a process whereby advertisers upload multiple image and text combinations, and the best performing combination for the audience is automatically created. So they're getting active feedback on which is the best performing combination of images and words and sounds and so on, and the software is directly targeting it to that particular profile for that particular person. So this is the targeting to the audience. And finally, don't just measure how much, measure how well. What they mean is, remember the A/B testing of the two lots of arrows to see which is the best, the wooden or the flint ones? They're doing this with adverts. So they have different versions of adverts, and the ones that get the most response, they're the ones they'll run. Incidentally, I don't know if anyone here has recently done anything with their driving license online. I recently actually renewed mine. Anyone looked online with anything to do with driving or car tax? You get a message about joining the organ donor register at the end. Now, 8 versions of that message were tested. And the one that got the best response was not the one they expected to get the best response, but that's the one that you'll see if you do that, because they tested them and the number of click-throughs was very different between the different versions. And so they estimate that tens of thousands more people would have signed up to the Organ Donor Register by changing the version. So this isn't something that political parties uniquely use. They call it experimentally informed programs. They mean we will test adverts and see which ones get the best response and use those. So, for example, the Lib Dems have got subtly different versions of the same advert, and they will have run them and then tested which ones get the best response. In fact, they even have adverts directly asking you to donate, different versions of that, and they will be able to tell, because it's digital, which advert collects the most money for them. So this is all being tested as we go through. And we're all seeing different versions of things. So this is the basic approach that is still being used today. Let the audience be your guide, so you profile everybody and then you decide who you want to influence. Tailor the creative. So you're essentially tailoring your policy messages to the response that you get, rather than starting off with principles, making policies, and then arguing with people that they should support you. And finally, test your ads the way you would in the other ads, and use the ones that work. Which, I mean, actually seems pretty sensible. Why would you spend money on advertising if you didn't know what's going to work? So, how much should you worry about this that is going on at the moment? Because a lot of people do worry. A bunch of researchers and technologists did send an open letter to Google and Facebook saying, we want you to stop posting political ads until after the election. We think, the democracy being broken. So a lot of people are very concerned about this and say that you should just stop running political ads on social media. I don't think that. I do think it's a good thing that we're now getting more information about how ads are targeted, and there's a very good project called Who Targets Me. I encourage you to sign up for that, and you can use that to look at how you're being targeted with political adverts and send that information back to them, and so they're able to do some research into who gets targeted with what, because the problem is, although we're now getting headline figures of, oh yes, it's women seeing this one, or people this age are seeing that one, it's actually much more detailed than that. And of course, the big villains who are often cited in this, although they've gone away and the data recently used, are Cambridge Analytica, who are credited by some people for Trump being elected. Although it's worth remembering that before Trump, they were working for Ted Cruz, and he got knocked out in the primaries. So I don't think they have magical powers, I'll just say that. The problem that was suggested with Cambridge Analytica was that they had psychological techniques, that they went far beyond saying you're certain sex or certain age or even a certain income or occupation, that you were being psychologically profiled and therefore sinister mind control was going on. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. This, I think, was the research paper that ticked off the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, because people who were basically political consultants saw this and went, well, hey, this is pretty great, we could use this for targeted campaigning. And they went to Michael Kosinski, at that point was in Cambridge, at the Cambridge Psychometrics Unit. He then went and worked in California. And this paper says, if we see your Facebook likes, basically, we can tell a lot about your character. And this caused a bit of a stir at the time. So this is some of their results, and for some of them, it's actually quite impressive. If we look at Facebook likes, we can tell quite well what gender you are in America, whether you're African American or white. To some extent, your religion and your political affiliation. Slightly less things like whether your parents were together when you were 21. Gays are apparently easier to spot than lesbians. Who knows? But when you get onto actual psychological measures, it all becomes a lot weaker. So age, not bad, but things like what are called the big 5 personality traits, things like agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness. It's actually quite a weak prediction, and I would suggest to you that any human could look at something as Facebook likes and probably do better than this as a predictive measure. Now, if you want to test this on your own social media feeds, you can go to University of Cambridge Psychometric Centre website, who, by the way, are not anything to do with Cambridge Analytica, the company. Cambridge Analytica was somebody who left Cambridge University and went, I can use these same techniques for you. I'm not allowed to take this data with me that we had at Cambridge University. I'll get you some more off Facebook. There were definitely some fishy things about how they collected the data. But this site is bona fide. And if you want to see how these techniques analyse you from your social media, you can go to applyMagicSource.com. So I did that. I did Twitter, because that's the one that I use. So this is what Twitter thinks about this. Sorry, this is what Apply Magic Source thinks of me. I'm not 31. I'm not a man. Although arguably I am quite masculine. So if you want to call it psychological gender, I suppose that's reasonable. These are the character traits that it gives me. Actually, I don't know, I mean, they're all kind of middling, so they're pretty safe, but I probably am quite impulsive. They're okay, but I also did proper psychological tests on the same site and got completely different results. So, again, I'm not entirely convinced. Interestingly, if I compare it with what Twitter itself thinks about me, I'm guessing Twitter must use similar measures, because Twitter itself thinks that I'm male. Twitter at least gets my age right by going from 18 to 54. A pretty big margin for error, but they do get it right. And Twitter, I think, goes from my interests. And I have to say, when I looked at my interests on Twitter, I thought, you've got those pretty well. And to be honest, if you showed me this list and said, make a wild guess, is this person a man or a woman? I'd have gone, well, I don't want to be stereotyped, but it's probably a man. So that's what Twitter did. Because when we're sorting a profile like this, we think that it's very personal, that people know us inside out, but of course it's not. It's just a series of mathematical measures that place us on a million-dimensional grid. So each of us is just a dot in somebody's matrix. That's the sense in which they know us. When some author is trying to sell books, says big data knows you better than you know yourself, or so it claims, it doesn't. It places you on a lot of graphs in relation to a lot of other people. And that means that when Twitter targets me with personalised ads, it sends me things like this. And to be honest, I really don't mind that Twitter thinks I'm a man, but I'm a bit upset in case I'm going grey. But it's endless entertainment from what Twitter thinks it can personally advertise to me. This one, I mean, how many times do I have to tweet about Liverpool Football Club, really? Again, absolutely nothing against West Brom champion, but it could not be more wrong. This one, I'm actually getting to the point where I'm going to have to buy a vacuum furnace just to find out what it is. Also quite worried about the woman in the picture who's not wearing this suitable protective clothing to be in a power furnace. Definitely not. And then just as it's getting ridiculous, they target me with an advert for targeted adverts. By AI, apparently. Because we all know that's magic. So when we hear that data knows us and is profiling us and has our psychometric measure and therefore can magically manipulate our minds, I think we need to bear in mind this is the level of crudity that we're actually dealing with here. It's obviously they're going to tell people who give them millions of dollars that they can magically read your mind. But the evidence is they're not really getting much further than very obvious things like this person is interested in this thing. This is my favourite one actually, because this is the vision of the personalised world where everything is exactly for view. Also, I like the idea that Twitter thinks I'm not just a man. I'm a good-looking young black guy called Stephen. That's me. All the shops are called Stephen. So this is the kind of image that we're sold, where everything is personalised just for us, and so the whole world will revolve around us. And in reality, we are just a little dot on somebody's graph, and that's as about as specific as it gets. So should we worry about big data in political advertising? Well, in one sense, yes, I think we should, because it has reduced politics to being a marketing campaign where you don't even have to find one message that appeals to everybody, because you can just find a message that appeals to this person, a different message that appeals to this person, and if they don't compare notes, they'll never know that you're promising two things that can't possibly be reconciled. But in another way, I think social media is not the cause of that, but it's the symptom, because for a long time, we've been quite disengaged from politics, and politicians have been quite disengaged from us. And in a way, if you were a politician thinking, how am I going to get in touch with people and campaign to people and get them to vote for me, what would you do? I mean, unless you've got a lot of members in your party who can go and knock on doors and talk to people face to face, it's really quite hard to have contact with voters and know what makes them tick and try and get them to vote for you and support you. So I think it's entirely understandable that politicians have gone to social media. But nevertheless, I think it's a bad sign, and especially targeting different people with different messages is a very bad thing. But at the same time, I think if you worry about it too much, you fall into the same trap. And the trap is seeing us all as lab rats. I admit it, this is just another excuse to show another photo of Socrates. My sadly deceased co-star, doesn't like it. It is a little feather boa. But we are very different from lab rats. And this, the other reason I have him here is to remind us that you can put a lab rat in a box and teach it that if it presses this lever, it'll get a reward. And this is how things like social media and devices and phones are often talked about, because they're designed on similar principles to the way that lab rats are put in boxes and trained to press a lever, and if they get food pellets, if they do the thing right. Now, look, I'm the same as anybody. I will go on Twitter when I can't think what else to do. I spend hours of my day looking to see what people are saying and if anybody's liked my terrible puns. But when it comes to important things, I don't just respond to a stimulus the way a rat presses a lever. I actually think about it, what I'm doing. And so when it comes to voting, I may see messages, I may have feelings and thoughts about them, but I'm still going to go into the ballot box and go, well, this is quite an important decision here. And so I'm going to weigh up what I'm going to do, because I have to live with myself afterwards. Also, I'm really lucky. I have friends with widely different views, so I have to be able to justify myself to all of them. So I have to prepare my arguments before I go in. So I think, should you worry about social media, big data and democracy? I would say, yes, a bit, because it's a symptom of how democracy has become less and less about ideas and visions, and more about how can we appeal to this person with something that will just instantly get them to do what we want. But if we worry about it too much, then we become a mirror image of those people. We go, I know, voters are just stupid, they're just like lab rats, they're just going to respond to a message and do whatever they want. And I don't think we are lab rats. I think we're brighter than that. So we should worry about it a bit, but we should worrying about it too much. And on that note, I'm going to end. I'm very happy to take questions or opinions or arguments. Over to you. Is there a microphone?
Any questions? There must be some. Fantastic.
So to kind of pick up that point you made at the end, that you feel immune to the lab rat argument, but there's clearly groups of people who think it does work and it's a mechanism to win. How confident are you that everybody's immune?
Well, it's a fair point, because we all think that we're immune and everybody else is susceptible. I think that's a fairly universal human impulse. The reason I'm sceptical is that nobody's found any evidence yet that people's minds have changed very much by targeted adverts. The thing that, the effect that, okay, so I think there's two effects that it does have. One is simply that the data enables campaigners to target their efforts where they're most needed. And I think arguably that was what did help Trump win, that he had data on which states he needed to work on, which states had enough people who were undecided, and that if he campaigned there, both online and in real life, then he could push them, and then that would be enough votes for him to win. So I do think that has an effect. And there is some evidence that it can amplify or dampen your likelihood to act on what you think. So it's very unlikely to make you vote differently, but it might make you more likely to actually go out and vote, or possibly less likely to go out and vote. And that is something that I do think is worrying, where you basically target the other side's voters and go, why bother to go and vote, it's pointless, or, oh, you don't want to vote for her, do you? Just remember, she's really corrupt. I mean, even so, arguably, you're just doing what all political campaigns do. You say, well, you should vote for me, but you shouldn't vote for them. Look what they've done. And the current election campaign, there's lots of that going on. So I think it's not that it has no effect, because I think it can have an effect on making me more or less likely to actually impact on what you think. But there's very little evidence that it changes your mind. But I think it's more the general degrading effect on the whole conversation. The fact it becomes very difficult to have public conversations. Although, I mean, the flip side of that is, and one of the reasons I'm against banning political adverts is because a lot of what I see politically on social media is people arguing with each other. And that's what politics should be. It should be all of us arguing with each other and saying, no, I think this because of that. And you say, no, but you're completely wrong, because what about this? And haven't you seen this latest report? And like, yeah, but okay, there's that report, but then this is the bigger issue, and we have it out in public. It's a pity that in public now mostly means on various social media sites. But that is the world we live in. So I say I'm quite happy to just get opinions. You don't have to. I know we're in a lecture, but you don't have to answer questions.
Do you think it might be a bit of a slippery slope? Like we said with 2004, the Democrats used it in their elections, and since everybody's using it. But with like the things coming out about like mobile phones watching and that sort of thing, not to get it insidious, but could it get insidious rather than just be targeting people who are already looking at that sort of thing?
What do you mean?
In the way of, so at the minute, like with targeted ads, you essentially advertise that then you've already bought. It's a bit silly.
Yeah.
But it gets to the point where somebody's looking, in kind of the way of, you see in like 1984, it's like, if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about being watched. Is it going that sort of direction, do you think?
Yes, and in many ways I think that's the thing that I find more worrying, that it's impossible to escape having data collected and being profiled unless you live in a cave, and then you attract so much attention by not being in the system that, well, that they're being attracted to different kind of attention. I think that's definitely true, and I think again we're only just becoming aware of how much data is collected on us, but also the putting together of that data, I think, is the other worrying thing, because you can give out small innocent bits of information, but when you put them together you learn a lot. Some of the things that the commercial data people like Axiom and Experian can spot, for example, because they know a lot about your shopping, is what festivals do you celebrate? What religious festivals do you celebrate? What are your hobbies? So they can actually know a lot about you that's quite personal. They might know about your sexuality, your religion, your moral values, all sorts of things like that that you would not think that anybody else could know about you. And they don't know for sure, and as I showed, a lot of the guesswork is pretty crude, but it is there and it is possible to infer it. And then it becomes very, very personal because you could say, well, in fact, actually, to go back to the, sorry, I keep jumping around. To go back to the New York City taxi database, somebody worked out that you could easily tell which of the drivers were Muslims because you could see when they stopped to pray. So if they didn't work at certain times of the week, and if they made their stops regularly these times of day, you could infer pretty well that this driver was a Muslim. And then all you have to do is try and match up that record to that specific taxi, and you know something quite personal about that person. Not only quite personal, but sometimes with the mood in America, something that could have consequences for that person. And so I think the ability to put together seemingly innocent bits of information and get this multidimensional picture can be quite sinister and can have consequences for people. So that, I really think we should be more concerned about that in general than about the specifics of political adverts. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Okay, so I have something about that, but I'll first have to ask whether you ever feel compelled to draw vectors on your jumper. Because I've been sort of imagining that the entire, yeah, it's distracting for a mathematician.
Well, of course, it goes all the way around, so it's non-Euclidean space.
Yeah, I know, I noticed.
Sorry for the non-maths people here.
So my question was about GDPR and how much you think that has or will change this in the future.
Okay, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, for those of you with outdoor hobbies. General Data Protection Regulation is the EU regulation which governs mainly how companies, in theory also governments, but they have only let out less of them, but certainly how companies use data about you. And there are various duties now on people that collect your data that they must be equipped to do. Things like they must be equipped to give you what data they have on you. You must have the right to ask them to delete it. Now, I think it's in general a good thing because it does actually say to companies, you can't just collect data on people and have no consequences. It's a responsibility, you take responsibility for it. And it also says to individuals like us, you do have some rights in relation to the data that we have on you, and you can go and request that certain things be done or not done. But in practice, you have to know about it and have a lot of time if you're going to do these things. It's not easy. And also, I always slightly worry about things that say, well, the onus is on you, the individual, to exercise your rights here. We've made a regulation, so that's our job done. And now it's up to you, because I don't think we should have to always go back and check and find out who's got what data and what they're using it for. I think we should be in an environment where we should feel pretty secure about the general basic rules of things. I mean, to compare it to food, for example, which is a very rough analogy, nobody says, well, we're going to put a QR code on your food, and if you want to see whether anything in it is poisonous or bad for you, you have to get your mobile phone out and use the QR code and go to the website and click through 19 things to read the ingredients. They say, well, first of all, there's laws that say nothing in it must be poisonous, and second of all, you have to put the ingredients on the packet so you can just pick it up and go, oh no, I'm allergic to that. So GDPR, I think, is a start, but I would prefer that we live in a world where we're able to assume that when we click OK on something, it's actually OK, rather than going, OK, and then finding all this information about us has ended up miles from where we expected. It's being used for completely unexpected things.
I think I read somewhere about how, like you were saying, for example, they have data on all of us unless you live in a cave. So the information is already out there, and there's this school of thought that we should be able to charge companies for using our information. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or because they already have all the data. So we, if they're going to use our data for anything, we always get like a payment or something.
I think it's an interesting idea, but I think there's a big flaw in it. This idea of data ownership, where it's like, well, it's my data, so it's mine. And if you want it, you have to pay me, and I sell it or hire it to you. But I think the problem is that treats data as if it's stuff. As if it's like, I have my data here, and I'll sell it to you, and now you've got it. But that's not really how data works. I mean, for a start, it's quite hard to say where your data ends and somebody else's data begins. Right? If I have a friend, and they have a photo of us, and they put the photo on Facebook, well, they've essentially shared my data, because Facebook will have a file. Facebook have files on all of us, even if not on Facebook. And so Facebook, her, right, good, we can slot her in and join the dots. So whose data is that? Is that my friend's data or my data? And the other thing is that you then get in a stage where people without much money go, okay, well, I'll sell my data, I'll sell my privacy, because I don't have much money. And people who do have money go, oh no, I can be private, which slightly already happens, but then it would become something where you don't really have you don't have complete protection in the law. Because I think the problem is data is mostly, it's not stuff, but it's an expression of relationships. So it's either relationships between people or between people and companies. And the reason why big companies like Google and Facebook have a monopoly is because they have data on a lot of people. So they essentially have relationships with a lot of people in the sense that they know a lot about us. It's a very unequal relationship. They know a lot about us. We don't know much about them. So, I mean, I think it's a good instinct to say, well, hang on, you're making money out of my data and I'm not getting anything from this. But I'm not sure that owning it or hiring it is the best model for that.
But instead of looking at it as a way for individuals to make money, you're looking at it from the perspective of you're making companies have to take sort of responsibility for using our data. So now they don't have to think about it, they can just do whatever they want. But if they're told, oh, you have to sort of get permission in a way or consent or something, we might be slowly reintroducing the concept of privacy or increasing awareness of the extent to which our data is being distributed out there.
I think that would be really good. I think to remember why privacy is valuable is a big problem. I think that's partly why we've let things get this far. That this, as you were saying, the idea that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And I say, if you have nothing to hide, you haven't really lived. Everybody has something everyone here that's over 18, you should have something that you don't want everybody to know. Okay, some people can know it, but we all need privacy, but we've kind of forgotten that that's important. And also, you're right, that the idea that companies have responsibility is also important. In some ways, I think the idea that we should have more control over consent and that we consent to this but not to these things would be useful. Although again, as long as it's not too complicated, so you don't have to spend ages scrolling through. But I think the other thing is just that companies should be responsible for bad outcomes. So when companies use your data and that means you can't get car insurance or you can't get a mortgage because you've been profiled with data that you didn't give them, well, that's having an impact on your life. And so companies should be answerable for that, and they need to be able to say, we reached this decision like this, and if you want to appeal, you can do this, not just say, oh, well, that's the algorithm, that's what the algorithm said. So I think those things where they have a real impact on people's lives, and much bigger than advertising. I mean, we've all grown up seeing adverts, unless anyone grew up in the Eastern Bloc before 1989. we've been bombarded with adverts. How are you finding the advert thing? Have you got used to it yet?
I noticed that it depends very much on the language. That's how you learn when you switch from one language to the other, because suddenly ads jump at you.
Yes, that is true. It's very restful going to a place where you don't speak the language, because they're just like visual noise. But, sorry, we digress slightly. But being able to ignore adverts, I think, is a life skill that we all learn. And rightly so, because you're going to spend your whole life with people trying to persuade you to do things for their own purposes, not necessarily because they have your best interests at heart. And I just reviewed a book called Don't Be Evil about the big Silicon Valley giants. And it's a pretty good book. It's written by Rana Tharuba, who is a business reporter. So she has a really good insight into the way businesses work. But she has this slight shock about, Google started off saying, don't be evil, and then she quotes somebody who used to work at Google saying, I realised that their interests and the interests of the users were not necessarily the same. Like, where have you been living all your life? How many companies do you know whose interests are exactly the same as your interests? You know, the bus companies, broadly, yes, their goal is to get people from one place to another, and my goal is to get from one place to another, but you know, they don't run their route straight to my house, and they don't do it for free. So I think understanding that people tell you things for their reasons and not necessarily for your reasons is a basic life skill that we all need to pick up, including online adverts. But when you're profiled and algorithms decide whether or not you can get a mortgage, whether or not you're going to be shown a job advert, perhaps. I think that is one thing that's different. Or even in America, and starting to happen over here, where it will make recommendations whether you should go to jail or not, whether you should get parole or not. When algorithms are doing that, then I think we really need to start saying, okay, now we really need to talk about what's this data, where does it come from, what's it being used for, how is the algorithm making this life-changing decision? And those are the really important things. So there's a hand at the back, and then we need to stop.
Awesome, yeah, I think so. I think this will be our last question.
Okay, no pressure. I like the way you've come with high visibility gear, and then you found seats that match it. Actually, lower visibility.
It's just a natural skill, I guess. I'm a computer scientist, and the simple fix to what you've just said is to make every decision explained. This would go back even to when actuaries made decisions about insurance rather than algorithms. You could say, why did you make that decision? And it should be explained. And if those decisions are explained badly, the legislation to either remove the incorrect data or say the decision should be different. But I suspect this will never happen.
How easy is that though? Because people who work especially with the more complex machine learning algorithms and neural networks say, oh, the thing is, even we don't know how it goes from being little owl to teenage owl, where you put the inputs and then inexplicable outputs come out, and everything that happens in between is a complete mystery.
Well, it's easy if you say, if you cannot explain the decision, you're not allowed to use that to make a decision. That's where the legislation comes in.
Okay, well, I think can we all vote for that? Who would vote for that? So there's a few, we've got a few, maybe a few neural network people maybe. That's simple. Marvellous. Okay. So thank you all very much. That's really interesting for me.
So that just leaves me to thank everybody for coming. We want to start a new tradition whereby we're going to, obviously as a celebrity, you get bestowed on you several honorary credentials, I hope, over the years. And I suspect we're going to give you one of the more prestigious, the IOP I Am a Physicist Girl Guiding Badge.
It's a long time since I was a girl guide. Thank you, that's a great honour.
So Thank you very much, Timandra, and thank you very much to Jill, who's signed throughout that entire lecture and the question and answers.
Yeah.